The signal arrives 6 minutes before orbital entry, not just late, but as if it were sent precisely for them. It comes from the lunar surface, from an area where, according to official data, no mission has ever been, and it comes from a female voice, too calm for panic. Don't respond to the moon, until you see who's standing outside. The cabin becomes quieter than a vacuum, because no one wants to be the first to ask outside of what. The commander immediately orders the signal to be ignored as a possible anomaly in the old channels, but Seo Haein doesn't turn off the recording. She catches the rhythm and the pauses between words, too precise to be noise. Min-jae notices her fingers tremble slightly over the tablet, not from fear, but from recognition, and this irritates him more than any anxiety. No one should recognize something that doesn't exist. There's no such mission in the NASA Center's archive, but the coordinates match a restricted area Min-jae heard about as a child, in his father's locked files. Back then, he was told it was a map error. Now he sees the same numbers on the screen and realizes, he was taken in not just for his skills, but because he'd already been too close to this place once before. The crew consists of 6 people, and up until this point, they've been nothing but professionals: a doctor with a dry sense of humor, a geologist who laughs at awkward moments, a commander with impeccable discipline. But now they're becoming people who've heard the impossible. And each, in their own way, is trying to pretend nothing happened. Haein approaches Min-jae before the final landing preparations and quietly tells him that the signal isn't just repeating, it's reacting to their movement. As the ship adjusts its orbit, the rhythm in the recording changes. Min-jae wants to brush it off, but then he realizes she's not trying to scare him. She's warning him. The commander demands complete concentration during the landing, but something has already changed in the cockpit. The doctor checks the pulse too frequently, the geologist stops joking, and Haein, on the contrary, becomes calmer, as if the closer they get to the moon, the less unknown there is for her. Min-jae catches herself thinking that this calm doesn't look like confidence, but rather like agreement. 20 minutes before landing, a malfunction begins, at first minor, almost imperceptible. One engine produces the wrong thrust, then the second adjusts too abruptly, and the module begins to drift. The altitude display drops faster than normal, and the surface beneath them transforms from an abstract map into real, all-too-close terrain. The commander shouts to maintain course. The automation tries to correct the trajectory, but the control system seems to be receiving conflicting commands. Min-jae sees one channel indicating an adjustment, while the other cancels the same adjustment. This isn't a malfunction. It's as if there's a dispute within the system itself. He drops under the panel, opens the emergency module, and immediately realizes the control signal didn't come from inside. It came through an external channel that should have been physically shut off. Someone or something interfered with their landing after entering the atmospheric corridor. The ship is heading into a dangerous corner, less than a minute from the surface. Min-jae burns his fingers on the hull, rips out the burnout unit, and manually assembles a bypass from the backup lines. He doesn't have time to think, he just repeats the movements his father taught him, as if his father were standing next to him, guiding him. The module levels out at the last moment. The impact with the surface is too hard, the hull creaks, the cabin is thrown forward, and for a second it seems they'll flip over. Then, silence. Only the hum of systems and the breathing of people who can't quite believe they're still alive. The first thing they see on the external screen isn't a landscape. It's tracks. A single trail leading away from their landing zone toward a distant crater. They look fresh. Too fresh for a place untouched for 50 years. Haein is the first to say it out loud, they're not old. The commander immediately forbids any conclusions, but no one argues. Because even without words, it's clear that these traces couldn't have survived for so long. Upon emerging onto the surface, the moon doesn't look majestic. It feels alien. Every step feels like an intrusion into a place where movement isn't intended. Min-jae feels the regolith crumble beneath her feet, and for the first time, she realizes the surface doesn't seem to support her weight. They find an old marker and antenna, half buried in dust but still functioning. The indicator glows a dim red. The geologist checks the model and turns pale. These were only used in the first secret program. Artemis 0, Haein says quietly, though no one has ever said that name out loud. Min-jae looks at her sharply. She doesn't answer, only continues scanning the signal, as if she already knows what she'll find next. They see the old module from afar. It's not destroyed. It seems to have grown into the surface, as if the moon had slowly absorbed it, but left its shape. It doesn't look like an accident, but rather a process. Inside, it's empty. No bodies, no signs of a struggle. Just things left behind, as if people had gone out for a minute and never returned. Scratched on the wall is a phrase, "Do not open what answers." They play the recordings. At first, it's a typical expedition: jokes, fatigue, work. Then there are pauses, strange glances, conversations with silence. One of the astronauts says, he's not transmitting a signal, he's returning ours. The camera shakes in the final footage. The frame shows an airlock. Behind the glass stands a man without a spacesuit. He doesn't move. He simply stares straight into the lens. The cabin gets colder than outside. The doctor says the recording is damaged. The geologist says nothing. Hayne quietly says he wasn't suffocating. That night, the signal returns. Now it's synchronized with their module systems, as if someone is adjusting to their internal rhythm. Min-jae recalls the landing and realizes they weren't just expected. They were being led. The commander orders them to wait for orbital confirmation. But in the morning, one of the helmets from the old module is outside, facing their camp. The cameras didn't record any movement. The decision is made without words: they go to the crater. Because staying means waiting for the next move of the one who has already started the game. At the edge of the crater, the geologist takes a step and disappears. The surface beneath him breaks, and he plummets, sliding down a gray slope into a dark shaft. Min-jae doesn't think twice, he leaps after him, drives in the anchor, and catches it just before it sinks into the depths. The rescue drags on longer than it should in a place where every second consumes oxygen and attention. Min-jae braces his boots against the edge, the rope cuts his palms even through reinforced gloves, and beneath him lies not just a chasm but a nearly vertical, smooth wall, too smooth to be a natural shaft. Choi, choking with panic, repeats that he saw not a rock below, but a black surface, warm according to the thermal imager, and that a shadow moved within it, mimicking his gestures from the wrong direction, the direction from which the backlight was coming. When they pull the geologist up, the commander wants to turn back immediately. Unstable ground, a sinkhole, possible avalanche, protocol demands a halt to the descent. But Hein is already standing at the edge of the shaft, ignoring objections, and slowly runs the scanner along the inner walls, as if reading not the shape but the underlying structure. Then he raises his head and says without his usual caution, "This isn't a crater. It's an entrance that was sealed until we got close enough." After these words, even the commander no longer uses the word natural. They secure the guide pins and descend in short sections, stopping every 2 meters to check their footing. The deeper the tunnel goes, the more the sensation of being in lunar rock fades. The regolith thins, the walls straighten, the curves take on a repeatable, machine-assembled quality, and the black material beneath the dust casts no familiar reflections. Hein walks the slowest, but with a frightening confidence, as if not searching for a way, but remembering a route she's never traversed before. The first anomaly below seems almost absurd until its impossibility dawns on the people. A wave of dust sweeps through the tunnel, rising from the floor in a narrow gray strip, like a sand tide in a place without wind, air, or any other natural environment for such movement. The stripe heads straight toward them, then suddenly spreads out around Hayne, wider than around the others, and disappears into the side channels. The doctor whispers a prayer, the commander hisses to hold formation, and Min-jae notices the main thing: this wasn't a random shift in the ground, but rather a careful probing. Minute later, the wave turns into a storm. Not an atmospheric one, but a directed one. A thin regolith shoots out from the depths of the tunnel toward them, obscuring their view, knocking off laser markers, and clinging to the fastenings, as if they really weren't being allowed to go any lower. Min-jae shields Hayne with her body, feeling the dust hit his helmet visor. Instead of panicking, she peers into the gray stream and says, too calmly for a normal person, "We're not being pushed away. We're being tested." And this phrase sounds more terrifying than any threat, because testing always means a criterion. The storm ends as abruptly as if it had been turned off. A black archway, completely cleared of dust, opens before the group, and beneath their feet, a surface suddenly appears that doesn't accept fingerprints. No seams, no screws, no traces of assembly, only a smooth, matte material that looks not constructed, but shaped immediately. The commander is silent for a long moment, then officially records the first extraterrestrial object in the mission's history, but the very word object already seems weak. It suits the door. It doesn't suit what seems to have seen them before they even take their first step. At the threshold, Heian pauses, as if the pressure in her ears had suddenly changed, and asks everyone to silence the channel. Min-jae irritably whispers that now is not the time for effects, but mutes his voice anyway. In this brief silence, Heian raises her palm to the archway without touching it and whispers a phrase that will later be quoted by everyone lucky or unlucky enough to hear the story of this mission: "This is not an object, this is an observation." Immediately after these words, the black wall recedes inward without a sound, as if it hadn't opened, but simply ceased to be an obstacle. The first chamber inside breaks the geometry of the crater outside. It's too high, too deep, too complex to fit within the volume they saw on the surface. Dark channels run along the floor, faintly glowing beneath a transparent top layer. The walls are ribbed like fossilized muscle tissue, and there's no familiar technology anywhere, no screens, no terminals, no visible engines. This space appears neither dead nor alive in the earthly sense. It looks like a place where function and matter have never been separated. On the far side of the room, an object awaits them that instantly makes everything foreign seem personal: an old spacesuit from the first expedition, propped on its knees, the helmet removed and carefully turned toward the entrance. The patch on the collar is legible even from a distance: Lee Neon, the radio operator from the recording. Inside, it's empty. No bones, no biomass, just a gray coating and a crack along the neck, as if the man hadn't died inside the suit, but had simply stepped out of it one day, like a discarded shell, and continued onward without the usual protection. Heian approaches first, and this is her first mistake, not fatal, but significant. She forgets to wait for a full isolation check and squats down next to the suit, running the scanner along the inner lining. At that very moment, a wave of light passes through the channels in the floor, the walls vibrate, and a niche opens in the center of the room, resembling a capsule without a lid. The commander truly snaps at her for the first time. The doctor practically screams that any contact could have activated the unknown environment, and for the first time, Heian turns pale, not from the contact, but from the realization that she herself had dragged them further without consulting him. The niche opens not toward the group, but directly toward Heian, as if the object hadn't simply reacted to the movement but was already recognizing a specific person within the biometric data. A short, clear signal runs through their helmets, everyone's interface goes blank for a split second, and when the image returns, only Heian's isn't missing an error. Instead, a route appears, consisting of coordinates and lines that the module's system hadn't transmitted. She whispers that she doesn't see the map on the screen. She knows where to go, the way a person knows where their own elbow is. Min-jae demands that they stop immediately and let the doctor scan her neural data, but Heian retreats from the alcove, looking genuinely frightened for the first time in the mission. She admits she can't separate her own intuition from what's coming from the outside. This is a crucial moment, not a triumph of the interface, but a crack in autonomy. The commander wants to close the access and return immediately, but at that moment a soft light path flares beneath their feet, exactly the one Heian just described, and the object thus cuts off their ability to pretend nothing happened. They move on not because they agreed, but because the object has already shifted the situation from a choice to a presence response. Each new passage opens not because of a break-in, but when Heian approaches, and this begins to weigh on the team more heavily than the mere fact of alien technology. The doctor records his observations in a trembling voice. Choi nervously jokes that they are no longer an expedition, but a procession for a living key, and Min-jae walks too close to Heian because he hasn't yet decided whether he's protecting her or guarding what she might become. In the second room, they find a handprint burned from the inside out on a black wall and an earth communicator, carefully fused into the surface, as if the object hadn't swallowed the object but preserved it as a sample. A fragment of the recording features the voice of the captain of the first mission. He says that the object doesn't take orders, but recognizes the structure of intent, and that within it, people become not visitors, but questions. The doctor wants to call this a metaphor for a person on the verge of a breakdown, but in this strange room, even rational terms sound like a pathetic attempt to cover up fear with a white coat. Choi, who had fallen in the crater, begins to behave worse than the others. He complains about footsteps behind him, even though the channel is clear, turns around twice to stare at nothing, and once takes aim at his own reflection in the glass wall. This isn't just panic. For the first time, he finds himself objectively interfering with the mission, and here the text finally transforms him from his role as a geologist to a person who was more quickly and honestly crippled by fear than others. When he whispers that someone inside the facility is adjusting the distance between people, it sounds insane. But later, this very phrase will prove more accurate than many instruments. In a side cavity, they find a section of transparent surface, behind which a network of structures is visible, extending not into the depths of a single chamber, but literally into the depths of the moon, like a gigantic system of vessels or cables piercing the satellite on a scale inaccessible to terrestrial engineering. The commander would have ordered such a recording classified, if he still believed secrecy worked here. In the distant reflection behind the transparent layer, the Earth appears not as a house, but as a small luminous organ, which this object has been illuminating for too long and too closely for the humans to continue to consider themselves observers. The doctor vanishes out of nowhere. He doesn't move, doesn't fall, doesn't scream. In one shot, he's simply walking with the group, and in the next, the spot is empty, and only his scanner, swinging, hits the wall. Panic breaks the line. The commander yells at everyone to stay put. Min-jae makes marks on the walls with a cutter. Hain clutches her temple and says she heard a shift, not a sound, but a brief fold in the very geometry of the room. This is the first direct moment when the subject demonstrates he doesn't need doors and traps. He only needs to change the place itself. They find the doctor in an alcove that wasn't there a minute ago. He's alive, but he's facing the wall, unresponsive for several seconds, as if he just returned from deep water. When he finally turns around, he says only one thing: she knows how many of us there are. Then he explains haltingly that he found himself in a pocket of space where a light pattern of all their heartbeats appeared on the wall at once. He couldn't see their faces, couldn't hear their voices, and yet he's certain the object counted them not as bodies, but as a group structure. After these words, the commander can no longer hide behind the word artifact. The path back closes before their eyes. The passage they came through flattens into a solid black plane. The doctor panics. Choi is on the verge of hysteria, and for the first time, the commander loses the intonation of someone who knows protocol. Min-jae tries to burn through the wall, but the energy drains into the material without a trace, as if any aggression here is simply converted into futility. And then Hain utters one of the key lines of the arc: "It doesn't want to kill us. It wants to understand who we brought." After that, fear changes form. You can run from a predator, but not from judgment. In the next room, the capsule opens itself and returns Lee Na-yeon's voice, not a rotting ghost, but a young, clear recording, as if a person were speaking from the other end of a pause, not 53 years later. She warns, don't let the system decide that Earth is ready to respond. And the recording erases itself, as if the object doesn't preserve memory like a museum, but plays it only at the right moment, when the meaning of the warning can be heard by those who are once again walking the same path. For Min-jae, this is the first real chill, not in the bones, but in the future. After this scene, Hae-in finally makes a mistake, no longer in action, but in interpretation. She confidently asserts that the object is non-aggressive and acts as a pure tool of comparison, but Min-jae unexpectedly contradicts her. If the tool already chooses the moment, the recipient, and the method of displaying memory, it is not neutral, it is active. This is a significant rift between them. Before, she was too right too soon. Now it becomes clear that her connection provides access, but does not guarantee a correct moral assessment of what is happening. And this is precisely why she again feels alive, not an infallibly chosen system. The argument ends when a window opens in the far wall, revealing a room containing a structure resembling a giant interferometer, pointed not at space but at a living projection of the Earth. Not a map, not an archive, but a current image with clouds, storms, and nightlights. It's too obvious to be a metaphor. The object isn't simply connected to the moon. It's been observing the Earth in real time all this time. And at that moment, even Hein realizes that the word neutral no longer applies. Any observation of this magnitude is already in action, even if it's emotionless. The blow to Min-jae comes immediately after the Global One. A hidden archive appears on his internal channel, revealing his father's name among the handlers of the first mission. Not supply engineers, as they called it in the family. Handlers. The short note contains just one line: if the system responds again, don't send those who can understand the noise, it will choose them. Min-jae reads it, looks at Hain, and for the first time feels not only anger at the center but also a personal betrayal through his own blood. He was brought here not by chance, but by a long human will that began long before him. He shows the note to Hain, expecting a shock, but instead she confesses her own. Back on Earth, she dreamed of patterns resembling the internal relief of an object, and she wrote them down as meaningless geometries. Now everything matches. This doesn't make her a daughter of the moon, but it makes the figure even more dangerous. Someone on Earth already left a response form here, and the system learned to search for receptivity in advance. Hain is not the chosen one in the mystical sense. She is the result of an old, unfinished attempt, passed down to the next generation as an invisible tuning of the world. The commander makes a tough decision: abort the exploration, bring everyone to the module, ascend to orbit, and quarantine Hain. But the object stops pretending to respect human decision-making. The floor beneath them begins to move gently, not pushing, but transporting the group deeper, as if space itself had become a conveyor belt. Min-jae drives a pin, but it sinks into the material and disappears without a trace. From this moment on, they are no longer exploring the object. The object is dragging them to the place they had always considered the true point of conversation. The central chamber opens like a cathedral built not for prayer, but for measurement. The dome is lost in darkness, and in the center hangs a structure resembling a heart, an antenna, and a cocoon all at once. Items from the first mission are arranged in concentric arcs around it: chevrons, communicators, gloves, a childhood photograph, a broken pencil, as if someone weren't studying people, but trying to probe them through their most intimate and sparse details. As Hain steps across the threshold, the cocoon glows brighter, and her heart rate on everyone's helmet displays evens out to a frightening, almost machine-like perfection. A figure emerges from the light, neither a humanoid nor a god, but a wavering image, seemingly mulling over human appearances and finding none suitable. It doesn't speak, but through Hain, the first truly formed sentence comes into the common channel: first contact not complete. Observation resumed. Requires a stable interface. Even the commander, clinging to discipline, involuntarily retreats. Because this is no longer a mystery of traces or an archival horror. This is a direct definition of the role that one of them is being offered or forced into. Min-jae breaks down first and demands Hain cut the connection, but her reply breaks through the heavy, alien viscosity of her speech. The object isn't asking for permission or promising peace, it's determining whether exchange is even possible between Earth and that level of reality for which the moon is merely an outpost. The first mission failed this test because it tried to subjugate the unknown before it learned to translate it. And their current arrival isn't a rescue operation or a discovery. It's a retake. And the worst part is that the system says this without malice, as if it were a dry function. The doctor, who had previously maintained his professional status, attempts to tear Hain out of contact with a sedative through the suit's emergency port. This is a new human impulse of control, very understandable and therefore dangerous. The cocoon reacts instantly, the lights go out, everyone is lifted off the floor for a second, a piercing pulse of pain runs through the helmet channels, as if the very fact of forced intervention was recognized as a disruption of the process. Min-jae holds on only because he manages to grab a ring on the wall. And the main thing he sees is that the object doesn't protect Hain as a valuable asset. It protects its own continuity. For him, she is already a knot. Choi finally breaks down and fires a flare gun at the cocoon, deciding that this is a creature they must destroy before it takes over Earth. The shot doesn't explode, doesn't ricochet, and doesn't hit. The flash dies in midair and fades, as if the very physics inside this chamber belonged to another world. In response, translucent figures in empty spacesuits from the first mission appear around the group. They don't attack. They simply stand in a semicircle, a reminder of the consequences of misguided actions. And this is visually more powerful than any frontal assault. One of the figures approaches, and Min-jae recognizes his father's gait faster than he can deny it. This isn't a sentimental hallucination, a diagram of the very same emergency circuit he used to save the module during landing flashes on his internal display. So the decision back then wasn't purely improvised, someone had prompted it through the system. The thought strikes harder than any confession: Luna had not only accepted them. She had been guiding him toward herself, simultaneously adjusting the trajectory of fate and technology. And this makes even his own heroism in the landing scene feel less than his own. Min-jae is almost physically sickened by the thought that some of his decisions could have been influenced from the outside, and it's here that his conflict deepens beyond the usual "I won't hand the girl over to the system." For the first time, he argues not just with a threat, but with the idea that human will itself could be merely a convenient conduit for an older calculation. Hain, hearing his anger, responds in a weary, lively voice, not someone else's translation. For them, there's no difference between intention and function until we carry it out ourselves. This is a significant turn. Humanity here becomes not a given, but the work of resistance. The commander decides to blow up the object with the module's nuclear emergency charge if contact becomes irreversible. This decision is logical, but the text does something important: it immediately tests it. The camera's dome reveals images of Earth from different eras, without cities, under the smoke of industry, with the first satellites, with today's orbital rings. The object reveals that the surveillance lasted not just decades, but at least the entire human technogenic phase. Blowing up the moon after this is no longer simply annihilating the threat. It's an attempt to attack the very fact that you've been observed for too long. Hain's composure is deteriorating, but she begs them not to interrupt the process with brute force. She's no longer hearing a voice, but the system's architecture. The object isn't configured to attack, it's trying to determine whether it's possible to open the next level of response without causing disaster. The first mission failed not because it encountered a monster, but because it responded to the unfamiliar with fear, force, and hierarchy. If we undermine the center now, the system won't consider humans dangerous. It will consider them unprepared. And it will choose another, perhaps more profound, method of observation. This thought is more frightening than war, because it abolishes the proud role of humans as the protagonist. Min-jae still doesn't trust the object, but he already trusts the way Hain's fingers tremble and the difficulty she has maintaining her own tone. He approaches her closely and delivers the first truly quotable line of this arc, not as a graceful pose, but as a naked readiness for destruction. "If this is a bridge, I'll break it along with myself." And just then, for the first time in a long time, Hain smiles vividly, not perfectly, not like a proper interface, but like someone who has heard not strategy, but loyalty. It's a small scene, but one like this is necessary to prevent the global idea from crushing the intimate nerve of the story. Earth ends the scene with open betrayal. A coded order from Center arrives on the backup channel: ensure stable contact at any cost, transfer Hain to the deep interface phase, prioritize data over composition. This is no longer ambiguity. It's a clear formula, stripped of all moral justifications. The commander, reading the message, finally understands the scale of his own role. His mission from the very beginning was to deliver a man to the machine, not to seek the truth. And suddenly, the Earth conspiracy becomes more terrifying than the moon. Because at least the moon doesn't pretend to love those it uses. The commander breaks down not from horror, but from a belated realization. He believed all this time that he was protecting a scientific task and the people within it, and now he sees that he himself was part of a long human greed, stretching out over half a century. The doctor demands an immediate retraction of the order. Choi is almost hysterical. Hain turns even paler than before, because he senses how the fact of Earth's consent is accelerating the process within the facility. "They didn't expect an answer from us," she says. "They were waiting for Earth to choose access again over caution." And that phrase encapsulates the entire indictment of civilization better than any tribunal. Min-jae chooses a third option: to prevent Earth from receiving a ready-made interface and to disrupt the system by brute force, so that humanity would once again fall into ignorance under favorable conditions. To do this, he needs to reconfigure the central node, integrating a condition of mutual consent into the very mechanism of contact, so that no future party can use a single person as a bridge without a confirmed choice from both parties. Essentially, he's trying to implant basic human ethics into a lunar scale machine. It sounds crazy. But it's precisely in such madness that opportunity emerges, when all realistic options are already lost. Hain hesitates, because she feels the consequences not just mentally, but physically. A rude interruption could leave them forever inside, while a subtle reconfiguration requires her to delve even deeper into the interface. But she nevertheless shows the way to the energy node. And here, history prevents her from being an infallible guide. she warns that she sees two streams at once, one leading to the node, the other to the stable memory of the first mission. This isn't omniscience, but a real dilemma. They can only be resolved by a sequence of actions. And if they make a mistake, they will either remain blind or lose time, which is almost non-existent. The path to the node leads through a descending shaft, where the object becomes almost biological. The walls pulsate with warmth, a rhythm resembling blood flow flows through the channels, and objects from an old expedition are fused into the niches: a notebook, a chevron, a childhood photograph, and a transparent capsule. All of this no longer looks like trophies, but like the system's attempts to understand a person through the traces they leave behind. For the first time, Min-jae feels not pure horror, but an almost painful pity for the mechanism that learns from people through the debris of their memories. And this makes the entire scene even more unsettling. Halfway through, Haynes suddenly says that without a stable memory, they can't touch the node. If they don't see what exactly went wrong in the first mission, they could repeat the same failure with a new formula. The commander demands they proceed according to plan, but for the first time, Haynes argues harshly with him. This is an important characteristic. She's not just receptive to the system, she's still willing to argue with people, even when she's almost half integrated into someone else's. Ultimately, the choice is made not by logic, but by the honesty of the risk. They turn to memory, because breaking without understanding has already proven to be the most earthly mistake. Memory doesn't activate like a video archive. It unfolds around them in scenes where the first mission again follows the same corridors, at first tired but alive, then irritated by lack of sleep, then arguing increasingly heatedly, and then the captain orders the core to be hacked by force, because he considers any unresponsive object a hostile resource. And here's where history makes a significant difference. The system doesn't kill them in response, doesn't punish them, doesn't take revenge. It simply begins to translate aggression as a form of contact. In other words, human violence becomes the material of the interface. And therein lies the true horror of the first failure. The most powerful scene in the memory is Lee Na-young entering the capsule voluntarily, attempting to give the system a clean answer without military protocol and stop the captain, but at that very moment, Earth sends a command for forced extraction. The severing of contact doesn't completely kill her, nor does it completely save her. It makes the entire first mission an unstable bridge, where some people died, some dissolved into the mechanism, and some remained in an in-between state. That same suitless person in front of the camera, no longer a corpse and not yet a new life form. It's one of the best twists in the text, and here it truly works. Haein weeps silently, and Min-jae finally understands why the target chose this particular human profile. He doesn't need a genius or a saint. He needs someone who can hold two-sided meaning without collapsing it into command or fear. The first mission failed because of alien greed, not because of unknowable horror. And this makes Earth guilty more deeply than any cosmic nightmare. The commander lowers his head, the doctor stops shaking and becomes rigid for the first time, and Choi looks at the floor as if he's realized that their civilization can break even what it hasn't yet understood. The system displays the following parameter without emotion: the window of stable contact will fully open in 42 minutes. After that, Haein will either become a complete interface and transmit its first real response to Earth, or the object will close for another cycle of silence. This is not a threat, but a calculation. And it is precisely this dryness that makes it more terrifying than an ultimatum. History is compressed to a precise time, and beyond that, it is no longer possible to pretend that there is an infinite space of solutions ahead. They have 42 minutes to decide not only Haein's fate, but also the moral state of Earth when it truly enters space. Min-jae fully outlines his plan, not to destroy the object or end the one-way contact, but to build a mutual access loop into the node, whereby any subsequent response will require not just one carrier, but a confirmed choice from humanity. It's a crazy bridge between engineering and ethics, and the doctor recognizes it not as workable, but as the only morally tolerable one. The commander agrees, because all other options either make Haein a resource or return Earth to comfortable ignorance, and they've already paid too high a price to hand the truth back to those who know how to use it effectively. The target begins to interfere openly. Corridors split, walls rearrange, each team member is assigned their own personal route. Choi hears his dead brother, the doctor hears his daughter's voice, the commander hears center with the order to shoot Haein, and Min-jae sees his father silently pointing in the opposite direction from the general path. But here, an important refinement works especially well. instead of simply advancing like Terminators, they actually fight each other for the line. Min-jae hooks everyone up with ropes, almost forcibly, because he understands the target's main rule: if someone goes after the most personal thing, the group will disintegrate into units that suit the system. Hae-in's steps are becoming increasingly difficult. Her movements are becoming too economical, her speech too precise, her stride almost flawless, as if her body is already adopting a new rhythm. And here Min-jae does something important. He doesn't yell, he doesn't promise to save her at any cost, but deliberately talks about trivial details, about cheap coffee at the port, about an old argument on the simulator, about a funny remark made before the start. He's trying to restore to her not an abstract personality, but a concrete, earthly unevenness that no system can reproduce perfectly. This technique is far more powerful than any speeches about love, because it's everyday and therefore true. The energy node appears as a spherical cavity with a black ring in the center, where all the object's channels converge, like nerves to a spine. Scanners show monstrous power, but without the usual source. The energy is generated not from the reactor, but as if from the very act of comparing states: observation, response, transference. Min-jae understands, if he touches this ring incorrectly, he will change not only the functioning of the chamber, but the way the object views the Earth itself. This is no longer a matter of breaking a machine. This is a matter of correcting the grammar of someone else's gaze. To gain direct access to the circuit, Hein must go deeper again, and this is the cruel limit of their plan. They can only save her by pushing her even deeper into the system. The commander, still not quite free of his habit of coercion, suggests restraining her and connecting her by force, but then Hein cuts off the very phrase that finally shatters the old logic of the mission: if you do this to me, Earth will be no different from the first team and from those who sent us here. And this works not as a beautiful retort, but as a moral hammer to the entire structure of the previous civilizational self-confidence. Min-jae approaches her and, for the first time, speaks not as an engineer, but as someone who fears not abstract contact, but concrete loss. He doesn't care what eras and networks peer at the Earth through the moon if the price of answering is its transformation into a function. But Hae-in responds not with tears or heroic pathos, but with a harsh, almost angry truth: you're still trying to bring me back, even though you should let me choose first. This is the best emotional twist of their story. Here, love gains a boundary for the first time, and the plot dramatically matures, because salvation ceases to be an unambiguous good. She enters the central zone herself. The ring opens, the channels in the floor light up, Hae-in's biometrics stabilize to an almost inhuman level, and a stream of data flows into the general channel that no one can fully process. Min-jae catches fragments, maps of lunar fields, long-range trajectory charts, signatures of unknown points, and one terrifying realization: the object is truly not a weapon, not a colony, and not a deity. It's a contact selection filtering station, an ancient system that decides not punish or save, but admit or defer. Such impersonality is more frightening than malice. Through Hae-in, the subject formulates its greatest proposition: Earth has for the first time reached a stage where it can not only be observed, but also responded to, if a stable translation is found. The first mission opened the window too early and tore it apart with violence. The current one has brought a stable interface. For humanity, this would mean the end of cosmic loneliness. For Hae-in, it would mean irreversible integration into the system. The commander whispers that this is the price of progress, and Min-jae almost strikes him. It's good that the text leaves this out. This is exactly how old temptations should sound to people raised on the idea that any breakthrough justifies any sacrifice. Earth finally finishes the job. Center accesses a backup channel and openly demands that Hae-in be kept in contact until the data is fully transmitted, threatening to abandon the crew on the moon and block their evacuation if they refuse. The conspiracy is no longer a facade, but direct pressure. The commander finally completes his human turn. He doesn't simply doubt, but consciously breaks the chain of command and manually shuts down center. From this moment on, he ceases to be a position and becomes a person who understood the system too late, yet nevertheless decided not to die within it before his physical death. Min-jae begins the reconfiguration, using the circuit once suggested by Father. Instead of a denial or access code, he embeds a mutually restrictive loop. Future contact must require the freely confirmed consent of both parties, not just one carrier. This is one of the text's most powerful ideas, because it transforms the climax into not just a battle, but an engineering exercise in morality. And that's precisely why the system reacts violently. The channels around the node collapse, the space begins to tremble, and Hain, sensing the process, smiles for a second so humanly that Min-jae almost forgets where they are. In response, the object displays dozens of possible outcomes: Earth responding with war, a cult, greedy colonization, a military takeover of the moon, interface markets, and children in labs. These aren't prophecies or threats, but a spectrum of probabilities, and it's precisely this form that's most frightening. The observation machine seems to be saying, "I'm not punishing. I simply see very clearly what you can do with everything you can get your hands on." Min-jae understands that the object isn't afraid for itself, but for the quality of the response. For it, humanity is neither a younger brother nor an enemy. It's a poor conversationalist with a potentially destructive temperament. Hein holds on with all his might, but manages to uncover another abyss. The object isn't alone. The moon is only a nearby observation station, a filter before a more distant network, which is still awaiting evaluation. If contact ends unilaterally and Earth is admitted without preparation, it won't be destroyed. It will simply be registered as a civilization, open to outside interest. And here, for the first time, the team's fear transcends personal survival. They realize they're no longer arguing about the fate of a single mission, but about whether a species should even become visible to something that views eras as phases. The system increases the pressure on Hain because it senses a loss of control. Her speech becomes too smooth, her movements too precise, and her eyes begin to look as if she's simultaneously inside the room and millions of kilometers away. Min-jae reaches out to her, and she stops him with a quiet phrase that works perfectly: "If you touch me now, I'll fall apart halfway and they'll take everything." He realizes that they refers to two sides at once, the center on Earth and the external network beyond the moon. From that moment on, his task changes completely, not just to save Hain, but to prevent anyone from taking her choice. Losing control, the center activates the final abomination, the module's emergency self-destruct protocol. 20 minutes remain until the explosion, the abort booth is far away, and the corridors are already being rebuilt. It's a good plot device, but it works better now because the commander is a living person by this point, not a function. He takes the return journey voluntarily, not as a hero by virtue of his position, but as a person who needs to make a choice, at least once, without self-interest or hierarchy. Min-jae is eager to go himself, but Hain firmly stops him. Without his help, the loop of consent will collapse. The commander leaves alone, and that truly weighs heavily. The text then does a wise thing. It doesn't portray his journey as a pompous final sprint, but instead offers short snippets of breathing, banging on hatches, and one phrase: "Let at least this answer not be stolen." This is exactly how strong secondary arcs should work, not with a lengthy confession, but with precise, belated courage. The Doctor and Choi hold the life support unit, and this, too, finally makes them more than just props. They're not saving the world. They're holding back the possibility that the two at the center will manage to achieve the impossible and not collapse prematurely. Min-jae completes the circuit, but activating the loop requires conscious input from the interface, otherwise the object will consider it violence and cut off the human layer. This means Hain must still perform the decisive action. She listens to the explanation without panic and asks only one question: "If this works, will I be able to return completely?" Min-jae remains silent. And this is one of the most powerful silences in the text. Because an honest answer destroys the illusion of beautiful heroism, the body, perhaps the memory, perhaps the voice, yes. But she will most likely no longer be able to hold on to the former, continuous version of herself. He still tries to object, to bargain, to find another plan, to tear time with his hands, as he tore metal during the landing. But Hain takes his hand through the rigid layers of his spacesuit and says a phrase that finally sets the moral of the entire arc: "You don't have to let me go easily, but you do have to not turn my decision into another cage." It's a brilliant line, because it cuts through not only the personal drama but also the entire pathos of salvation as the right of the strong. From this point on, the reader can no longer desire its simple happy ending without betraying the very idea of the story. She activates the loop. The entire surveillance camera shutters, feeds flash, a chorus of data flashes through helmets, and the system formulates a new mode: contact switch to mutual acceptance. Direct response postponed. Surveillance maintained. It's neither victory nor defeat. That's precisely why the scene is so powerful. Hayne bends back, as if the weight of the entire satellite had been pushed through her, and for a second it seems she might simply break. But she remains conscious. Not like a triumphant bridge, but like a man who has held a door in a faithfully not fully open position. The loop works, but the price is higher than Min-jae had hoped. To complete the regime, the object requires a stable human anchor within the system, not a hostage, but someone already deeply embedded and capable of maintaining the transition without breaking. Hayne understands this before he does and says simply, she will be the anchor. If she is pulled out by force now, the loop will collapse, the object will either close for more decades or release an uncontrollable signal. This is a true climactic fork. Everything that came before was a path to this moment, where love, ethics, and the future of the species are compressed into a single gesture of consent or refusal. The commander returns, wounded, with a scorched glove, but with the self-destruct protocol disabled. The path back has begun to crumble, time is running out, and the choice can no longer be hidden behind excuses. Min-jae understands for the first time that not every breakdown can be fixed by restoring the old form. Some systems, once exposed to the truth, can no longer be restored to their former state without renewed violence. And Hayne is one of those systems. This is a bitter but profoundly important thought, making the farewell scene inevitable, not simply tragically beautiful. He offers to replace her with himself, because for him, it's the natural logic of loyalty to pay with his own body for someone else's freedom. But the system fails instantly. The circuit is based not on biology, but on the history of interaction, on those moments when Hae-in could hear without attempting to subjugate. Min-jae hates this answer with all her heart, because the object's logic here is impeccable, and impeccable logic in tragic moments always sounds like cruelty. It's good that the text doesn't allow him to heroically cheat the system. Otherwise, everything he's earned so far would be worthless. Hae-in asks the others to leave and hands Min-jae a small chip containing a partial decryption, not the entire truth, but enough to prevent the center from telling any more beautiful lies. This is important. She's thinking not only about the metaphysics of contact but also about the banal, earthly politics of truth. Then she asks for the most humane thing possible, if she returns, to welcome her as a human being, if not, to not hand over her image to a cult, a weapon, or a trophy. This is one of the best scenes in the story, because after all the cosmic scale, the speech is once again condensed to the defense of one person's dignity. Their farewell is brief, almost angry from the excess of the present, and therefore more powerful than lengthy confessions. Min-jae touches her helmet with his own, the light from the knot moving across the glass in a subtle vibration, as if the moon itself were recording this gesture as a human unit of pain. Hayne smiles, an almost transparent smile, and looks away first, allowing him to leave. This shift in gaze is a small detail, but it is what makes the scene come alive. It's not the object that lets him go. She herself forces him to perform the act of leaving, while it still feels like an act, and not just a loss. Evacuation becomes a race through a shifting labyrinth. Walls close in, light flows through the channels, dust clouds rise again, and behind them, it's no longer the ancient silence of the moon, but the active restructuring of space after the introduction of a new regime. Choi breaks down twice, the doctor can barely stand, the commander loses his bearings, and Min-jae drags all three of them along, almost in rage, because anyone who stops here for even a minute risks becoming part of the alien architecture before they can even call it fear. They aren't killed. They're simply released as much as is deemed acceptable. At the exit, the storm comes again, but this time not as a blockage, but as a push. A gray stream hits their backs, as if the object itself has completed its internal phase and no longer needs the extra bodies at the node. Min-jae glances back once and sees a narrow vertical line of light, resembling a human figure, deep in the shaft. It's unclear whether this is Hae-in or a form the system uses to show him what he can bear. And it's precisely this ambiguity that makes the image powerful. If the scene had given a direct answer, it would have weakened. For now, it remains a true farewell to an exposed nerve. The path back to the module no longer coincides with the path inside, some of the old tracks are covered over, the markers have disappeared, and Lee Na-yeon's helmet, which someone had placed facing their camp, lies back inside the module, as if all the external theatrics were only the first stage of the attraction. This is an important detail. The object can also function symbolically, not for aesthetics, but to exert the right psychological pressure. The commander orders launch immediately after a minimal check. On the moon, they are no longer explorers. They are bearers of a dangerous truth, and to remain near the source for too long is to voluntarily ask for a new price. Min-jae loads Hain's chip onto the board and simultaneously severing all direct synchronization links through which Center could steal the remaining communication with the object. He's forced to break the module's protocol literally during pre-flight preparation, and this unit now functions better than in the first version, because after the whole incident with the landing and his father's schematics, his engineering determination seems less like plot magic than a hard-won habit of cutting off someone else's control before it even feels necessary. The commander doesn't argue. He already knows all too well the value of proper obedience. During takeoff, they are again diverted, but this time by Earth, not the Moon. A false correction is received by the orientation system, diverting the module toward the interceptor. Center doesn't want to retrieve them, but rather take control of them along with the data. Min-jae recognizes the tampering signature and manually disables the external autocorrector. The ship enters orbit using rough ballistics, violating safety tables but maintaining the most important thing, autonomy. This is an important symmetrical rhyming moment. During landing, the Moon guided it, now Earth is severing it. And he twice chooses human risk over someone else's plan. Already in orbit, a new signal arrives, not the call sign of the first mission, but a pure sequence from the surface, wordless and uninterrupted. Min-jae recognizes the rhythm instantly. Hain loved to record it on Earth as a beautiful mathematical error within a perfect sequence. This doesn't mean she's returned. But it proves the main thing, the connection hasn't collapsed into silence. It's simply no longer one-sided. The Moon no longer merely watches. Through it, one can now hear the specific handwriting of a specific person, even if they no longer exist in their former physical form. The return to Earth proceeds in tense silence. Everyone on the team understands that descending the ramp and telling the truth is no longer an option, because the truth is too vast and too convenient to be appropriated. They review some of Hain's transcripts and see how deeply the center knew about the interface's capabilities, how long it spent profiling susceptible individuals, and how purposefully it led the mission to repeat the first mistake. But the text itself doesn't make Hain predestined. She's not a victim of fate. She's a response to the free and unfree decisions of the people who opened the door a second time. As they approach, Earth seems all too ordinary: clouds, oceans, nightlights, everything that once seemed like home, but now feels like a world unaware of its presence within someone else's larger map. The doctor weeps quietly and angrily. Choi twirls an empty inhaler in his fingers like a superstitious anchor. The commander writes a confession, and Min-jae sits in front of the screen, listening to the lunar rhythm as a presence. The contrast works well here. A vast cosmic mystery becomes the backdrop for the very earthly, physical, weary return of people who know too much and cannot unsee it. On Earth, they are met not by journalists or a scientific committee, but by a closed quarantine hangar with armed guards and men in civilian clothes, whose politeness smells of a purge better than any threats. The center has no intention of voluntarily bringing the truth to light. The commander manages to warn Min-jae with a glance, but he has already made his main move in orbit. The Heian chip and the archival materials have been distributed across independent networks, stations, and open storage facilities with a deferred auto-publishing key. This is important, because the hero here doesn't figure it out at the last moment, but rather wages war against the monopoly on narrative in advance. While they're trying to isolate them, the world outside is already beginning to crumble. Footage of an old mission, a man without a spacesuit, Lee Na-yeon's empty spacesuit, a view of an internal facility, evidence of a conspiracy, and a fragment of a new activation, where Haein speaks through the system about a mutual access regime, are surfacing online. In just a few hours, humanity gains too much truth to be stuffed into a press release. The center loses its most important weapon, the ability to intelligently choose what to consider official reality. This is one of the best narrative responses to the earthly conspiracy, not to defeat it by force, but to strip it of its monopoly on interpretation. Min-jae's interrogation breaks down not because of torture or threats, but because the screen in the closed room suddenly turns on and shows the moon in real time. A pulse of light passes against the backdrop of a crater, forming the same sequence already familiar to millions. The interrogator forgets to speak. Min-jae realizes two things at once: the contact is not controlled by the center, nor even by humanity as a collective, and Hain, or whatever her voice has become within the mutual access regime, has just publicly proven the channel's independence. After this, no official isolation seems all-powerful. The world then splits quickly and messily. Some demand the destruction of the moon as a threat, others want to immediately establish response protocols, others make a saint of Hain, others see it as a dangerous precedent for military programs, and still others are looking for children and adults capable of hearing noise with a similar profile. Min-jae is especially good in this phase of the story because his new role is not heroic, but defensive. He doesn't open another door, but navigates the information field like a minefield, repelling any attempts to turn Hain into a trophy, a religion, a weapon, or a marketing logo for a new era. The commander publicly admits his role in the mission and disappears from view almost immediately, a fine, poignant touch on how state systems can quickly erase those who become too honest too late. The doctor joins the International Commission on Contact Ethics. Choi sells the rights to a silent interview and rarely says the word moon anymore, and Min-jae refuses awards and positions. The world turns them into heroes, traitors, and madmen. But the text correctly leaves the hero with a different focus. He's not concerned with status, but with the fact that the lunar rhythm grows longer at night, as if someone were learning to speak. Month later, the old, dead communications satellite suddenly turns its panels precisely toward the moon and transmits a short series of pulses, matching the rhythm of Hain, before shutting down again. This is a very positive turn of the second phase. Contact begins to understand Earth's infrastructure not through a brute force hack, but through a gradual assimilation of the form of our machines. Panic in the world grows, because it becomes clear that even without a new expedition, the window is no longer completely closed. But along with the panic comes another feeling: if the system isn't pushing hard, but is learning, then humanity still has room for a mature response. Or for another big mistake. Min-jae receives an old paper envelope from her father's archives, preserved by someone outside the center. In the letter, her father admits that the Earth's curators understood the moon's function back then, but still chose to risk it for the sake of an advantage over their own species, not for the sake of knowledge. The last sentence hits home: if they ever send someone capable of hearing there again, it won't be Earth that needs to be protected from the moon, but that person from Earth. It's a powerful, precise ancestral echo. It doesn't exonerate her father, but it transforms him from a convenient shadow of the conspiracy into a man who once also realized too late. New race begins, no longer a cosmic one, but an ethical one. Is it possible to respond to the system if no one knows who or what lies beyond the moon? And does humanity have the right to reveal itself after having once sacrificed its expedition for access? Politicians, markets, the military, corporations, academic circles all are beginning to fight not for the truth, but for the right to formulate the appropriate answer. Min-jae understands that the consensus loop has only bought time. It hasn't changed the nature of greed. It has simply forced civilization to finally look at it without the anesthesia of self-justification. And yet, the story doesn't descend into complete obscurity. On forums, in independent labs, and in small university groups, a different language of communication is beginning to be constructed, not command-based, not military, not colonial. Young mathematicians and engineers are taking Hain's open data and attempting to assemble a first answer that wouldn't be an attempt at dissection. This is the important, human hope of the text. Not elites, not corporations, not powers, but small, honest groups are beginning to learn not to take, but to ask. It is in them that Min-jae sees the only justification for the price Hain paid by remaining an anchor within the moon. One night, he receives an anonymous video fragment, a black background, a slow fade-in of a gray surface, the edges of an arch, familiar channels of light, and a distant figure. The face is invisible, but the gait is the same, a little quick on the left leg after an old injury during training. The figure raises its hand, and the recording cuts off with a rhythm. Min-jae sits motionless for a very long time. And this is the right tone for the scene, not hysterical hope, but a heavy, almost painful possibility. He knows he could be wrong, that the system can adapt to expectations, but still, for the first time in a long time, he allows himself not to deny the possibility. Immediately after the video, a text message arrives: "I'm not where you think. But I still choose." It works perfectly because it doesn't offer cheap happiness. Hain doesn't promise a return, doesn't speak of love, doesn't ask for a romantic wait. She simply returns to the world the key element of the entire story: choice. If this choice still exists, then contact hasn't erased the person completely. It means everything they fought for in the surveillance camera wasn't a lie. And for Min Jae, this is more important than any promises of the former Hain physically returning to Earth. 6 months later, a tight observation ring is deployed around the moon, but no one dares authorize a direct descent. The cost of the first 2 attempts has become too obvious. Too many now know of the center's conspiracy, and the risk of repeating the first mistake with better ships and worse morale is too great. Min Jae advises an independent group on non-violent response protocols, and every time politicians demand quick results, she sternly reminds them, greed in space doesn't make people stronger, it simply makes disaster more technologically advanced. And it is precisely in this function, as an inconvenient break, that she becomes especially valuable. The silence, however, doesn't last forever. Short signals begin to emanate from the lunar surface, not only to Earth but also into deep space, as if the system, after the loop's introduction, is reconfiguring its position within a wider observation network. Astronomers confirm that some of the pulses are directed toward places where no known objects exist. And for the first time, humanity feels not just we are not alone, but we are already recorded. The loop postponed a direct answer, but it didn't change the fact that the question had long since moved beyond the moon. And from that moment on, Earth lives not in philosophical, but in practical cosmic openness. In a closed meeting, one of the generals proposes building an outpost on the moon and taking physical control of the facility before someone from outside can get there faster. Min Jae listens and understands how little human arrogance it takes to repeat the same old mistake with new engines and pretty flags. His response becomes one of the key quotes of the new era: "You still think you found the door. But this is an eye, and it has already seen who you are." This phrase captures the essence of the story, not the conquest of the unknown, but the confusion of a species that has finally revealed itself as transparent. The world is divided not between believers and non-believers, but between those who want to open contact at any cost, and those who believe that the right to respond must first be earned through maturity. Min Jae becomes one of the figures in the second position, even though he himself hates being turned into a symbol. This is a good late-phase conflict. A hero who hates being glorified is forced to become a figure because he knows the price of misguided acceleration better than anyone. And it is precisely this inner discomfort that makes him persuasive. He is not a prophet of a new ethics. He is simply a man who has already seen how beautiful-sounding arguments lead to empty spacesuits. On the anniversary of the landing, a global experiment is underway, a non-violent mathematical answer, assembled by an international team without military layers or hidden patents. When the signal goes out, nothing happens at first. Seconds, minutes pass, and the world is almost ready to declare the attempt a failure. And only then do all the Earth's satellites simultaneously produce the same micro-delay, too precise to be a glitch, too gentle to be a threat. It's a magnificent, silent answer. The moon doesn't explode the sky or send angels. It simply says, "Received." And in this restraint lies more respect than in any fantastical fireworks display. Min Jae listens to the noise of the equipment after this received and suddenly understands what Hain has achieved by remaining an anchor. She didn't open the gates to humanity. She gave the species the chance not to immediately enter space as a marauder. This is a very mature semantic trick. The greatest achievement here is not access, but the delay of access until the response ceases to be violence. This is precisely why the story works not as a tale of a great breakthrough, but as a mature manhwa about the discipline of a species that for the first time has the opportunity not to seize, but to pause in the face of the unfamiliar. Late that night, after the broadcast, Min Jae receives another packet, a long sequence, in the middle of which lies a barely perceptible human glitch, like Hain's old limp if translated into mathematics. He smiles for the first time, not from the hope of returning to the old days, but from recognizing the handwriting. This is crucial. The ending doesn't sell the cheap dream of "she'll soon be back to her old ways." It offers a more subtle victory, the preservation of personal imperfection within a gigantic system. Hain didn't become a perfect interface. And that's precisely why she remained as much herself as possible after Luna. The first major arc ends with a question that weighs heavier than the catastrophe. If the moon was merely a filter and a close eye, then who exactly has now received Earth's first truly accepted answer, and what will they consider proof of humanity's readiness, technology, morality, the ability to choose beyond profit, or the person who once remained there so the world would have the opportunity to respond honestly? This is the right denouement, not a point, but an open door that can no longer be mistaken for a trophy. In the final frames of the arch, it's not the Earth or the moon themselves that matter, but the space between them, no longer empty, but filled with information that has changed the price of silence. Cities glow below, a gray disk hangs above, and somewhere within its depths, Hain continues to be neither a prisoner nor a goddess, but a living note of deferred access. The world can no longer return to its former naivety. Space has proven not empty. It has proven patient. And this is perhaps the most disturbing discovery of the entire story, because at least the void waits for nothing. But the patience of an alien system does not equal safety. Within weeks of the first received, new forms of manipulation are emerging on Earth, programs to cultivate artificial interfaces, schools for children sensitive to noise structures, diplomatic projects dreaming of turning the loop of consent into a geopolitical bargaining chip. Min-jae watches this and understands that civilization is once again trying to turn a miracle into a tool. His main battle is no longer with the moon, but with his own species, which always tries to call a resource everything it hasn't had time to truly mourn first. He writes his own document, 3 Simple Rules, later dubbed the Hain Charter, though he himself loathes the name. No contact through the coercion of a single consciousness. No secrecy that precludes public choice. No response if Earth cannot honestly acknowledge the price already paid by those who came before. At first, the Charter is derided as a sentimental impediment to progress. Then, everyone who saw the recordings of the first mission and the empty spacesuit at the entrance begins to cite it. Thus, the small text becomes a moral seam in a civilization accustomed to valuing speed over consequences. In one of the quietest and best scenes, Min-jae returns to the old port, where Hain once argued that noise is more beautiful than a straight line, if not stifled by formula. Now the counters are filled with keychains featuring the lunar sequence and t-shirts featuring a man without a spacesuit. He's sickened by how quickly the market can turn horror into a souvenir. And at that very moment, the cafe's terminal goes blank for a second, then resumes its familiar rhythm with a brief, human glitch. For the first time, Min-jae laughs not out of relief, but out of almost friendly recognition. Hain, too, sees what people turn fear into, and he, too, can chuckle darkly about it. In distant orbits, strange geometries are beginning to be detected. Old, dead vehicles, unconnected to one another, sometimes align themselves in a configuration that mimics the pattern of channels beneath the lunar surface. This is both terrifying and beautiful. Not because they're captured, but because the very engineering history of Earth seems to be gradually becoming a language understood by the system. Contact ceases to be the event of a single mission. It slowly grows into the infrastructure of civilization. And this is a very powerful idea for the next arc. The response will no longer be a group feat, but a way of life for an entire species. Choi, who had remained silent for a long time since his return, comes to Min-jae one day with a printout of the thermal profile of the very same smooth wall in the crater where he fell. He confesses that all this time he couldn't forget one fact: the surface was warm not like a working machine, but like human skin. It's a small scene, but it perfectly creates an additional eeriness for future seasons. Perhaps the object isn't simply adapting to humans conceptually. Perhaps it's learning them bodily, on the level of what it means to be alive for a creature that has never had a human body by nature. Doctor publishes a report on the psychological effects of contact, and for the first time the world sees the raw data. More terrifying than any horror film, those who survive the object don't go mad or become fanatics. They simply stop perceiving hidden violence as the normal price of progress. Contact seems to strip away social anesthesia. For politicians, this is almost more dangerous than an alien invasion, because such a change can't be bombed, classified, or framed. This scene is powerful as a semantic continuation. The moon has changed not only the scientific picture of the world, but also the threshold of tolerance for false necessity. Min-jae increasingly wonders why Hain held on when the first mission failed. And the answer comes not through mysticism, but through a clear, almost bitter psychology. The target needed neither a genius nor a prophet, but someone capable of listening without the immediate desire to dominate. Hain was suitable not because she was the chosen one, but because she combined receptivity with the inner discipline not to turn the misunderstood into prey. This makes her choice even more tragic and powerful. It wasn't fate that had consigned her to this knot. Her very human form made her sufficient for Luna. At a global conference, a corporation demonstrates an interface emulator, a neural network trained on Hain's open-source patterns. Essentially, it's a clever attempt to circumvent the human cost through technical imitation. Min-jae bursts into the closed demonstration not like an action hero, but as someone all too aware of the cost of such circumventions. He shatters the entire pathos of the project with a single phrase: "Everything you've tried to copy has only worked because it's cleverly refused to be a thing." It's one of the text's finest late-breaking lines. It commemorates Hain, critiques technogreed, and embraces a new ethic of connection. The longer the new era drags on, the clearer it becomes. Earth changed not because a great answer came from without, but because the moon forced it to see its own form. People are no longer just arguing about space, but also about themselves, how they make decisions, whom they are willing to sacrifice for the sake of a leap forward, how they justify hidden violence with beautiful words. In this phase of history, Hain remains not a character out there, but an absent center, around which civilization, for the first time, attempts to build a conversation not about profit, but about the cost of choice. This is a very mature and rare final chord for the genre. And yet, a more personal question hangs over all of this. If one day Earth manages to provide an answer worthy of mutual access, will Hain return to the form of a human capable of walking the Earth again, or will her existence forever remain divided between the signal, the moon, and the memories of those who knew her before? Min-jae dreads this question almost as much as she longs to hear it one day in a direct channel. Because not every love can withstand an encounter with someone who has returned by a different path than the one they once took. One sleepless night, Min-jae receives the longest signal he's ever heard. There are no words until the very end, only a vast array of rhythms, like a slowly developing new language, patient and unforced. And only at the end is a short, vivid phrase, too personal to be fake: "Are you still fixing what can't be restored to its former state?" He smiles through his weariness and answers into the empty room, though he knows the direct line is now one way: "Yes. Only now I first ask if it wants to be the same." It's a magnificent condensation of the entire story into a single exchange. This unsent response becomes an internal characteristic for him. Previously, he thought that repair was a victory over a broken thing, and salvation was the return of a thing or person to its original form. Luna shattered this convenient logic. Sometimes salvation isn't about restoring the old, but about preserving the new state from those who would immediately want to call it a resource. This is why Hain's story ceases to be simply a tragedy of loss. It becomes a measure of civilization, the extent to which humanity is capable of not appropriating what was revealed to it through a sacrifice it had no right to demand. Year later, a rare orbital alignment places the moon in perfect alignment with a distant region of space from which, according to Hain's calculations, the first direct external response should one day come. The world freezes. Observatories are silent. Cities dim their lights. The military keeps missiles at the ready, as if they still believe that the dignity of a species is measured by the speed of a retaliatory strike. Min-jae sits in the dark observation center, clutching an old letter from his father and an empty cup of cheap coffee, because only mundane earthly things in such moments keep him from getting lost in the scale of what's happening. There's no armada, no fiery sign in the sky. Instead, all the world's receiving stations are detecting a short packet, not from the moon or any known satellite, but from a distant direction beyond it. The packet is encrypted not with a perfect alien rhythm, but with a human error within a perfect sequence. A glitch that only those who know Hain's signature can recognize. This is one of the best late twists. What remains in the system hasn't simply survived. It has already learned to speak outward without completely dissolving into the alien structure. The personality proves more resilient than even the object itself imagined. The world is once again exploding with controversy, but for Min-jae, everything at this moment is condensed into the utmost simplicity. Hain is alive, as much as life can be defined after passing through the lunar filter. And if so, then the main story is only just beginning. The first arc wasn't about contact per se, but about the right to prevent Earth from stealing the very ability to respond. The next will be about whether humanity can become a species truly worth responding to. A very fitting final twist, the moon turns out to be not the end of the road or the final boss, but the first honest test before entering true cosmic adulthood. In the final scenes, Earth and the moon are depicted not as a planet and a satellite, but as two ends of a question, between which a new thread stretches. At one end is a species accustomed to taking by force, but for the first time given the chance to learn more slowly. At the other is a system too ancient for our emotions, but perhaps already capable of distinguishing between greed, stubbornness, love, and the refusal to turn humans into instruments. And somewhere within this thread lies Hain, who has become neither a lost cause nor a saint, but a living condition that ensures that the next contact does not begin with a crime. It is a very pure and powerful final metaphor. Min-jae emerges onto the roof of the research center at night and looks at the moon without the former romanticism of conquest. He no longer sees it as a goal, a resource, or a monument to human courage. He sees an eye, a filter, a mirror, and a place where a man once chose not to surrender another to either the system or his own greed. This gaze contains a new, harsh tenderness for the world. If space truly is filled not with emptiness but with patient observation, then humanity's most important discovery may not be that someone is out there, but who we become when that finally ceases to be a theory. A new packet flashes on his terminal, brief as a whisper. Just 2 parts. The first is a mathematical sequence, unlocking the next layer of language. The second is a human phrase, without pathos or solemnity, which makes it more powerful. This time, take your time. Min-jae stares at the screen for a long moment and understands the ultimate meaning of everything he's experienced. The most mature response to the cosmos can begin not with a leap forward or a heroic assault, but with a discipline rare among humans, the ability not to tear down a door that, for the first time in history, has been opened honestly. And so the story ends neither with victory nor with catastrophe, but with a grave advantage over the past. Earth now has time, knowledge of its value, and a living reminder in the form of those who returned from the moon not with a trophy, but with a boundary. The question remains open, as it should: will humanity, having already failed first contact, be able to withstand a second if at the other end of the channel awaits neither a monster nor a god, but something far more difficult for our species, an interlocutor who sees us all too clearly?